As he pushed open the front door, he was surprised to see the kitchen light on. Marisol was sitting at the table, a stack of law textbooks spread out in front of her. She looked up when he came in, her face a mask of neutrality, but her eyes were sharp, observing him like she was dissecting a case study. "Hanging out with the boys?" she asked, her tone even but edged with something Paco couldn't quite place. "Yeah," he replied shortly, heading for the fridge to grab a bottle of water. He didn't want to get into it with her right now, especially not after the way their last conversation had gone. He could still feel the sting of his father's words, the way Marisol had looked at him like he was some kind of lost cause. "You upset Dad, you know," Marisol said, closing her textbook with a soft thud. "And you really hurt Maya with your comments. And me, too." Paco stiffened, turning to face her. He really wasn't in the mood to get into this again, especially now that he had gotten all that tension out of him out there on the skate park with his buddies. Talk about a mood killer. He wished he had just sat out in his car listening to music. Should have known Marisol would be waiting for him like a viper, ready for round 2. "You don't get it, Marisol," he snapped. "You're the one who's always judging me, acting like you're so much better just because you're studying law, because you've got it all figured out. You don't know what it's like to be a guy right now, to have everyone telling you that everything you're supposed to believe is wrong." Marisol leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "What does that even mean, Paco? What are you talking about?" He threw his hands up, frustration boiling over. "I'm talking about how everything's changed. You go online, you listen to people talk, and it's like men are the enemy now. Guys like me, we're not allowed to have opinions. We're not allowed to push back without being called toxic or sexist. But all I'm trying to do is find my place in the world, and you, everyone, make me feel like I'm the bad guy." Marisol's face softened and she let out a sigh. "Paco, that's not what I want. I'm not trying to make you feel like the enemy. I'm just trying to show you that there's another way. That maybe the people you're listening to, the ones who are telling you that women are the problem, they're not giving you the full picture. They're giving you very biased opinions." "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. He could feel the tension in his shoulders ease just a little as he looked at his sister. For a moment, he almost wanted to open up, to tell her about the confusion he felt, the gnawing uncertainty that had been growing ever since his father's stern lecture. But he couldn't bring himself to say it. Marisol stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "Paco," she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. "I know it's tough. I know you're feeling a lot of pressure to be a certain way, but you don't have to live up to anyone's expectations except your own. And I think you're better than this. I think you're smarter than what these guys online are telling you." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, he saw his sister not as an adversary, but as someone who actually cared, who wanted to understand him. He swallowed hard, blinking back the sudden sting of tears that threatened to rise. I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be." Marisol squeezed his arm, giving him a sad smile. "That's okay, Paco. None of us really do. We're all just figuring it out as we go." He nodded, unable to speak, and she stepped back, letting him go. "I've got a ton more studying to do. These papers I should be writing are kicking my ass," she said, giving Paco a look of exasperation. "Just think about what I said, okay? Nobody is trying to change you. We just want you to be aware of how bad rhetoric and biased opinions can literally change the way you think. Base your opinions on your own experiences, not what some other guy has to say. That's all." "Yeah," he muttered. "I get it. See you later, Marisol. Don't study too hard." "Of course I will. What do you mean?" she answered him, cocking her head like a dog with a crazy look on her face, eyes bugged out. They both laughed. "See ya, Paco." As she disappeared down the hallway, Paco stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the spot where she'd been. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark, unknown abyss. He could either jump into the familiar, easy territory of anger and bravado, or he could step back, try to find a different path. But which one was the right choice? Paco opened the fridge and stared at its contents, his mind still spinning from the conversation with Marisol. He pushed aside a half-empty carton of orange juice and a bowl of leftover arroz con pollo, settling on a pack of sliced turkey and a block of cheese. He grabbed a loaf of bread from the counter and started making himself a sandwich, his movements slow and deliberate as he tried to process everything from the past few hours. Marisol's words were still echoing in his head. Base your opinions on your own experiences, not what some other guy has to say. It was hard to admit, even to himself, but she had gotten to him. For the first time in a long time, he felt uncertain, like the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he'd thought. He took a bite of his sandwich and grabbed a can of Coke from the fridge. As he leaned against the counter, he heard the sliding door from the back deck open. His parents, Alma and Raul, stepped inside, their quiet murmurs of conversation drifting away as they noticed Paco standing there. Alma smiled, her face softening as she took in the sight of her son. "Did you eat enough? You're still growing, you know." He grinned, the corners of his mouth lifting despite the conflict still inside him. "Yeah, Mom, I'm good. Just making a quick sandwich." Raul followed Alma inside, his face expressionless but his eyes flicking to Paco with a look that was hard to read. It wasn't anger exactly, but there was something heavy there, like he was still mulling over their argument from earlier. "How was your day, Paco?" Alma asked, opening the fridge to put away a pitcher of iced tea. "Did you go out with your friends after we talked?" "Yeah, I met up with the guys at the skate park," Paco said, taking another bite of his sandwich. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at his father. He didn't want to get into another argument, not when the tension had finally started to ease. "We just messed around for a bit, then went to Wendy's." Alma gave a small, approving nod. "That's good. You boys need time to relax and have fun. It's been a stressful week for everyone." Raul leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching his son. "Did you have a good talk with your sister?" he asked quietly, his voice even. Paco swallowed, wiping his hands on a paper towel. "Yeah," he said, not meeting his father's gaze directly. She made some good points. I get where she's coming from." Raul's expression softened slightly and he gave a slow nod. "That's all I want, Paco. I just want you to listen, to think for yourself. It's not about taking sides. It's about making sure you know who you are." Paco nodded, feeling a small, reluctant swell of respect for his father. It was rare for Raul to be this calm, this understanding. Usually, their conversations ended in shouting matches or cold silences. But tonight felt different. It felt like they had turned a corner, even if just a little. "Thanks, Dad," Paco said quietly. I appreciate that." Alma glanced between them, her face lighting up with a small, relieved smile. "Well, look at this," she teased gently. "My boys are actually talking to each other without arguing. It's a miracle." Paco chuckled, the tension easing a bit more. "Don't get used to it, Mom." She laughed, swatting him playfully on the arm. "Oh, hush. You two can be so stubborn sometimes." She turned back to the fridge, pulling out a container of flan she had made earlier. "Are you sure you're not still hungry? I made flan for dessert." Paco's eyes lit up. "Actually, yeah, I'll take some of that." Alma cut him a generous slice, sliding it onto a plate and handing it over. "There you go, mi amor. Enjoy." Raul gave a small, approving smile, watching his wife dote on their son. "We're going to watch a movie in the living room," he said. "You want to join us?" Paco hesitated, glancing down at his phone. He'd been planning to go online, check out some of the usual websites he frequented, but something held him back. He wasn't ready to dive back into that headspace just yet. "Nah, you guys go ahead," he said finally. "I think I'm just going to chill in my room for a bit." "Okay," Alma said, giving him another kiss on the cheek. "But you know you're welcome to join us if you change your mind." "Thanks, Mom," Paco said. He finished his flan and rinsed the plate in the sink before heading down the hallway to his room. Inside his room, Paco closed the door behind him and flopped down onto his bed, staring up at the ceiling. The familiar urge to open up his favorite manosphere channels tugged at him, but he hesitated, his finger hovering over the YouTube app. "Think for yourself." Marisol's voice echoed in his mind. He let out a frustrated sigh, dropping his phone onto his chest. For years, these channels had been his go-to source for advice, for a sense of belonging. Guys like Andrew Tate, fresh and fit, they made everything seem so simple, so black and white. They told him what he wanted to hear, that he was in the right, that he was justified in his anger. But now, the certainty he had felt was cracking, splintering under the weight of his own doubts. He picked up his phone again, scrolling past the usual recommendations for videos about alpha male strategies and why modern women are a problem. Instead, he searched for something different. 2024 election reactions. He clicked on the first video that popped up, a clip from a mainstream news channel discussing the outcome of the election. The screen filled with split views of a Republican commentator and a Democratic strategist, both speaking passionately about the results. Paco listened, really listened, for the first time in a while. The Republican commentator spoke about the importance of traditional values, of restoring order and strength to the country. It was everything he was used to hearing, everything he had believed without question. But when the Democratic strategist began to speak, Paco felt a pang of something unexpected. Curiosity. She talked about the need for unity, for moving past divisive rhetoric, about fighting for equality and standing up for marginalized communities. Paco frowned, feeling the familiar defensiveness rise up, but he forced himself to listen. He could almost hear Marisol's voice again, telling him to consider other perspectives. The video ended, and Paco closed out of it, his mind buzzing with new thoughts. He didn't agree with everything he had heard, but he couldn't deny that it had made him think. He clicked on another video, this one a clip of young voters on a college campus discussing how they felt about the election. They were divided, passionate, each side sure of their own beliefs. Paco leaned back against his headboard, staring at his screen. He found himself gravitating towards videos that didn't fit into the neat categories he was used to. Videos of people like him, confused, trying to make sense of the world without resorting to anger or blame. He watched a few skateboarding trick videos, letting his mind rest, the familiar flips and grinds soothing in their simplicity. He didn't know how long he sat there, surfing through video after video, his thoughts swirling like leaves in a storm. He kept expecting the anger to come back, the familiar surge of righteousness that usually filled him after watching his favorite manosphere content. But it didn't. Instead, he felt something different, something that felt suspiciously like relief. Paco set his phone down, letting out a long, slow breath. Maybe Marisol was right. Maybe he had been letting other people's opinions shape his own without even realizing it. Maybe it was time to step back, to really think about what he wanted, who he wanted to be. He lay back on his bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the uncertainty swirl around him like a fog. It was uncomfortable, not knowing what came next. But for the first time, he felt like he was finally taking a step towards figuring it out. Outside, he could hear the soft murmur of the TV in the living room, the familiar sound of his parents watching a movie together. For a brief moment, he felt like a kid again, safe and protected by the walls of their home. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him, and allowed himself to rest in the unknown, just for tonight. Paco lay on his bed, still scrolling through videos, when he heard a soft knock on his half-open door. He glanced up to see Maya standing there, looking hesitant. She had her arms crossed over her chest, and her expression was uncertain, like she was trying to decide whether to say something or turn back around. "What's up, Maya?" Paco said, sitting up and setting his phone aside. He wasn't used to seeing her look this unsure. Usually she was full of energy, always bouncing in and out of rooms, chatting away about her day. "Hey," she said quietly, stepping inside but lingering by the door. Can I talk to you?" "Of course," Paco said, patting the edge of his bed. "Come in. What's going on?" Maya hesitated for a moment before she sat down on the edge of the bed, fiddling with the hem of her oversized hoodie. "It's just, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at school, and I wanted to talk to you about it, if that's okay." Paco felt a twist of guilt in his stomach. He had heard bits and pieces from Marisol earlier, but he hadn't really processed it. He'd been too wrapped up in his own frustration and anger after his argument with their dad. Now looking at Maya's troubled expression, he realized he hadn't even asked her if she was okay. "Yeah, of course it's okay," Paco said gently. "What happened?" Maya took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on her hands as she spoke. It was after the election results came out. You know how everyone was tense already, but some of the guys at school, they were celebrating. They were making comments, saying things like, "Your body, our choice," and laughing about it. At first, I thought it was just a joke, a really bad one. But then it got worse. Paco frowned, leaning forward. "Worse how?" "They started following us, me and a few other girls, down the hallway, saying all this stuff about how women need to be put in their place now, how we don't get to make decisions about our own bodies anymore. One of them grabbed my arm, Paco. He laughed, like it was funny, like it didn't matter that I told him to stop." Paco's jaw tightened, a surge of anger flashing through him. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice low and sharp. "Do you know his name?" Maya shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know all of them. It was a group, and they were just shouting things, being loud. But I recognized a few faces. They're the same guys who post videos trolling girls and saying bad things about us on TikTok, you know? They call us hoes, 304s, future baby mamas and worse. And the school does nothing about it. They're just as bad as the ones you like to listen to online, the ones who talk about putting women in their place and demanding that we submit, whatever that means." Paco felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but he couldn't find the words. The realization hit him like a cold wave. These were the same lines he'd heard in the Manosphere videos he'd been watching for months. The same rhetoric he'd laughed at, nodded along to, without really thinking about what it meant when it was applied in real life. "Maya," he said, his voice rough. I didn't know it was that bad. I'm so sorry." Maya wiped her eyes quickly, trying to hide the tears. "It's not your fault, Paco. But it hurt. It hurt because I know you watch those videos too, and it made me wonder if you think like that, if you believe what they say about us." Paco's heart sank, and he felt the sting of shame wash over him. He hadn't realized how his own words and actions, even the ones said in private with his friends, might contribute to the kind of experience Maya had at school. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I've watched those videos, yeah, and I've said things that I shouldn't have. I'm starting to see now that it's not as harmless as I thought it was. It's not just jokes. It's affecting people, hurting people. I'm sorry if I made you feel like I was on their side." Maya's face softened, her tears drying up as she looked at him. "I just don't get it, Paco. You're my brother. You've always been there for me, protected me when I needed it. But when you talk like those guys online, it feels like you're different, like you're someone I don't recognize." Paco swallowed hard, feeling the lump in his throat grow. "I don't know, Maya. I guess I wanted to fit in. I wanted to feel like I was part of something, like I had it all figured out. But I see now that it's not that simple. It's not about being alpha or whatever they call it. It's about being a decent person. I don't want to be the kind of guy who hurts people, especially not you." Maya's eyes searched his face, and she nodded slowly. "I'm glad you said that, Paco, because I need my brother right now, not some guy who thinks I should just stay quiet and let things happen to me." "You've got me," Paco said, his voice firm. He reached out and pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. "I promise, Maya, I'm going to do better. I'm going to look out for you and for Marisol, and I'm going to stop letting these idiots online tell me how I should treat women." Maya hugged him back, her grip tight, like she was afraid to let go. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." Paco pulled back, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "You're tougher than you look, you know that?" Maya laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Yeah, well, I learn from the best, even if he's a bit of an idiot sometimes." He chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Fair point. I deserve that." Maya stood up, wiping the last of the tears from her eyes. "I should probably go to bed, but I'm glad we talked, Paco. I feel better now." "Me too," Paco said honestly. "Good night, Maya." "Good night," she replied, giving him one last smile before heading out of the room. As she disappeared down the hallway, Paco leaned back against his pillows, staring up at the ceiling. He felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off his chest. The anger, the frustration. It was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't a fire burning out of control. It was something he could hold, something he could manage. He thought back to the boys at Maya's school, the ones who had harassed her. He realized now that he had been one of them, in a way. Maybe he hadn't been at her school, but he had contributed to the culture that allowed it to happen. He had laughed along with his friends, made comments he knew were wrong, all because he wanted to fit in, to feel like he was part of the crowd. But that wasn't who he wanted to be anymore. He picked up his phone, scrolling past the usual channels he followed without clicking on any of them. Instead, he searched for something different. Videos about standing up against harassment, about what it really meant to respect women and all people, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, and country of origin. He clicked on a video titled, "How to Be an Ally, Supporting the Women in Your Life." As it played, he listened intently, feeling the fog in his mind start to clear. He didn't know if he could change overnight, but he was willing to try. For Maya, for Marisol, for himself. By the time the video ended, Paco felt a strange sense of peace. It was a small step, but it was a start. He put his phone down and lay back, closing his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He didn't know where it would lead, but he was willing to find out. And that, he realized, was the first real choice he had made for himself in a long time.